Welcome to Mission Blue Heart Podcast. I'm Arshia Singh, your host, bringing you an episode made to inspire and foster hope about ocean and environmental conservation through interviewing and learning from activists, artists, scientists, and influencers. Today, I'll be talking to Michael Stocker, a musician, respected scientist, and bioacoustician who founded Ocean Conservation Research. Stocker has written and spoken about marine bioacoustics and the impacts ocean noise pollution has on marine life since 1992, presenting in national and regional hearings in television, news publications, and universities. As founding director of Ocean Conservation Research, he is using his fluency in bioacoustics to explore the impacts of noise on ocean animals, to inform ocean policies towards decreasing human bioacoustic impacts on marine habitats. It's great to be talking with you today. You actually happen to be our first guest for the Mission Blue Heart podcast, and I'm looking forward to learning from you. So you're both a musician and a scientist, which is an interesting combination for me. So, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got both into music and science.
Well, actually, they dovetail pretty well in terms of the story. But I started studying piano at 4, and I had a knack for it as well. But I also was really infatuated with fish in the ocean. And so by the time I was 10 years old, I had like aquariums all over the house, and my parents were supporting that. And we all go to the beach, and my mom would drop me off in a tide pool, and then she'd be done for the day. She'd just go and crack a book and work on her tan, And I was totally fascinated. And at that time, California's tide pools were really abundant with all different species and varieties. It's changed a lot since then. But so I wanted to be a marine biologist, and I got into high school, and I had this high school teacher who had this remarkable skill of making biology boring. And I said, that's biology. That's not what I want to do. I had to pith frogs to get a grade in the thing. So I fell back into music. I went to the music industry, and I found pretty soon that the people who got paid most reliably and the best were people who were technologists, and so I studied that in school. I studied acoustics and technical stuff. And I ended up doing that for the bulk of my early career. And then in 1992, the Navy was proposing a system whereby they could communicate to submarines globally just by putting sound in the water and transmitting it all over the place. And as a biologist who was into sound, I said, that's a real bad idea. Mm-hmm. And so I started presenting at a lot of public hearings on this stuff. The guys who were proposing this were physical oceanographers and brilliant. It was a guy, Walter Munk, was a guy who really kind of conjured this thing up. But they saw animals as input devices, and if the input is too high, you turn it down a little bit. But that was really, they didn't think about it from a phenomenological standpoint. So I was presenting, and a lot of the people who were into the biology of this stuff were the environmentalists, but they didn't have the math. They didn't have the understanding of physics, and which I did because, physics, acoustics, electronics, all stuff intersected the biological thing. So I found myself in a position where I was actually had something worthwhile to bring to the table, which was being able to take complex scientific information and translate it to the people in the environmental community, but also take the concerns of the environmentalists and write papers and things like that to the, to the regulators and some of the people who are doing the technical work. So that's kind of how it's very circuitous from where I started at 4 years old, but from where I'm looking right now, it's a straight line. So yeah, it worked out okay.
I find it very lucky that you found your passion at a young age, and you're able to pursue that through, different areas throughout your life.
Oh, I'm blessed. It's been great. Yeah. I could just be a chef at a restaurant or something like that.
You mentioned that you were able to convey, these very big and complex scientific ideas into clear and simple concepts and terms. And I, as a person of youth, I kind of find this rare. So I would like to know what is your method, and why do you think it's important that more people do this?
So I avoid using numbers, and I avoid using jargon. A lot of people, if you just put an equation up on it, it might demonstrate how smart I am, but it's not going to convey the information that people need to know it. And so it's really, it's a storytelling thing as much as anything else. And also, there was a big problem early on where people were talking about this communication program in terms of metaphors that were completely inappropriate. They were saying it's as loud as a Saturn V rocket underwater. It's like Saturn V rockets aren't underwater. They would not ignite. It wouldn't make that noise, So to try to avoid using metaphors or metaphors that don't make any sense. Well, I mean, one of the things you can say about sound in the water, it transmits, it propagates really easily because water is more solid than air is. And if you, for example, put your, scratch on the top of your tabletop, you might be able to hear the scratching a little bit, but if you put your ear on the tabletop, you'll hear it loud as a bell because it's not wood's not compressible, and it transmits or propagates sound. Well, water does the same thing. It's 3,000 times the density of air.
Yeah, I think it's important to also have an emotional connection with your audience. I think that's how you really get them reeled in. And
very important.
Yeah. And I know that one of your research areas is to understand the impact of noise in the ocean and how that affects marine life. So expand on that. Tell me a little more about that.
Well, I mean, the ocean, if you get down a few feet, 100 feet or so, it starts getting dark pretty fast. And also in really lively waters, it's turbid. You're lucky if you can see, 10 feet. In really turbid waters. You can see 40 or 50 feet in some clear waters and things like that. I could see 50 miles from where I was today easily. I could see mountains are 50 miles away. So we're highly visual above the water line. Below the water line, it's not water. It does not transmit light. It transmits sound. Mm-hmm. So pretty much all the animals in the ocean use sound as a communication medium, and they use it in different ways because we have air, which is compressible. So we receive sound through pressure gradients, where water is not compressible. So they receive sound through what they call particle motion, or it's kind of atomic motion, where the little components, molecular components of water are vibrating. And that's one of the reasons why it's so efficient. These things basically oscillate in place, and they can transmit sound, quite easily.
So what are the main sources of noise pollution in the ocean?
The Western economy. Sorry.
I guess that's one way to sum it up.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's the globalization of trade was really that, the ocean is 10 times louder now than it was just 50 years ago, and largely have to do with shipping noise. There was a guy, Donald Ross, he basically said that the noise due to shipping in the ocean was going to get two decibels louder every decade, and it has. So now it's in 10 years, in 50 years, it's 10 times louder. That's just that noise. But we have what brought everybody's attention to this had to do with military sonar and communication sonar and jamming sonar or whatever. And these guys, when they're throwing energy around, the military doesn't pull their punches. And we started seeing strandings, catastrophic strandings around 2000, 98, 99, 2000. And these catastrophic strandings were largely deep diving whales that were getting their ears blown out, and they freaked and they surfaced. But when they surfaced, because they're deep diving, they suffered essentially a case of the bends, what divers do. When you decompress too fast, all the nitrogen in your blood system bubbles, and these things were coming up. They look like milkshakes inside. Mm-hmm. And then some other stranding things that were happening. There was other animals were suffering from this. So then the Navy is responsible for some of this, although they really throttled back a lot. For the first 6 years that I was involved in this or so, they were in denial about it. They were trying to come up with research that supported their ability to be able to continue doing the work that they were doing. And finally, I think they came to terms with the fact that it was more expensive to mitigate for bad public opinion than to do the right thing. So they started funding, proper research on this stuff. Fossil fuel companies, they are, if you look at deep water offshore drilling, they don't just stick a straw in the ground and pull out oil and then figure it out later. They have to separate stuff that they need from stuff that they don't need. And they, the oil products that they want, they pump up to the surface, but the stuff that they don't want, the garbage, the water, the brine, the gases that they don't need, they re-inject it back into the deposit. But this is under really high pressure. If they're down 5,000 feet, it's basically 250 pounds per square inch, 2,500 pounds per square inch. It's high pressure. And when you're moving multi-phase substances, whether it's gas or water or sand or brine or whatever, under high pressure, it's not a formula for quiet. It's noisy. So this stuff roars down there. They have all this equipment, machinery on the seafloor. So that's one of them. But they have, they're shipping the stuff around. They have this, what they call floating FPSO, floating production, storage, and offloading equipment that they're constantly, shipping stuff around. So that's one of the noises of them. And then they have all this equipment that monitors this stuff. And increasingly we're getting into, and not just in the fossil fuel industry, but also in science and other industries where they have this equipment that goes down and does stuff. And they have to control it with something. So what do they control it with? They have these acoustical modems. They send this equipment down and it's basically this jingling sound. And now there's some proposals to have an underwater GPS system that would essentially be constant everywhere they wanted to, anywhere they're going to do any kind of industrialization. And this is a jingling sound that, because of the propagation characteristics of water, it would probably be in the 10 to 12 kilohertz range, which we can hear, of course. And, if you have your boat in a, beautiful bay near this stuff, you'd hear this really high-pitched thing coming through the hull of your boat. And that's humans. And we can say, stop it, or let's get out of here. But all animals that hear in that particular range would be subject to the same noise. That would largely be within 10 kilohertz would be marine mammals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, and you mentioned that oil companies drilling for oil is one of the sources for noise pollution. And so the first thing that I think of is that oil is such an integral part of our community, from transportation to everyday things like heating. And so in your opinion, what's the best way to address this issue? Can we drill oil in a way that's not as noisy? Or do you think that we should switch from oil altogether?
We should stop using less energy, period. That's it. So I've been working overtime on offshore wind. So we had this campaign we were running with Oceana, Southern Environmental Law Center, Surfrider, and some other groups that were involved in it, to stop the 2017 offshore energy plan was to drill on all four coasts. And they were going to start in the Eastern Seaboard, and they were going to put up all this drilling. And before they did that, they were going to do all the surveys, the seismic surveys. Oh, that's another thing I didn't mention with the offshore. In order to actually do offshore oil, you have to survey for it. They use these air guns, which are basically explosions that go off every 10 to 15 seconds. They kick this pulse down into the substrate, and they read the return on these streamers, and they can basically model what's going on below the seafloor, the seabed. And so they don't just survey once and done with it. They have to survey all the time as they're drawing the deposit down, because they have to know what's going on. So they're constantly, with these explosive sounds, they're constantly running this stuff. And it's everywhere. It's everywhere where they're pulling oil. So that's another, it's a roar, and you can hear this stuff 1,500 miles away in a deeper water situation. So, but we managed to, predicate it on the noise and the potential for oil spills and the industry itself. We managed to put the kibosh on offshore surveying on that on the Atlantic seaboard, which is consequently also they're not going to drill there, at least where we are right now. So now offshore wind is okay, where it's pivoting off of one energy source to another, and offshore wind doesn't have as high a carbon footprint, but now on the Atlantic seaboard, they're putting these pilings in to anchor these turbines onto. So instead of having millions of seismic survey air gun blasts, you're going to have millions of pile driving strikes.
Yeah.
What's the difference? I mean, they can mitigate a little bit easier because they can put bubble curtains around, and there's ways they can make it less loud, less noisy, but it's still noisy. I mean, it's like all of a sudden, you know, having somebody building an apartment building next to your house for the next 10 years. You know, it's not going to kill you, but with the North Atlantic right whales, I don't think they're going to survive this one, honestly. You know, they're putting so many wind farms on the eastern seaboard. They're already just holding on by their fin tips. And we already know that increased noise levels increases their stress level. And we know also that their breeding fitness is being compromised by this. One of the reasons why they're not producing and they're dying off is because their breeding fitness is being compromised by all of the industrialization, from ship strikes to lobster traps to noise. And now we're going to assault them with this other noise. It's a balance of harms issue. You know, if we're going to use energy, we have to produce it somehow. But one of the issues is, you know, I just got an electric car with woohoo. I don't have to buy fossil fuel to get around, but I have to get the energy from somewhere.
Yeah.
And I'm in my own little car in a house. I live out in the country, and there used to be a train platform like 100 yards from my front door, and that's gone because I have my nice little car, so we need to stop using more energy. That's really that's the answer. Stop buying more crap from China or what. You just have to stop this idea that continuous economic growth is what constitutes, you know, a success metric. It's not.
Using less energy, I think a big part of that is an increase of awareness for the consumers, because I think that we're so used to using energy without even thinking of it, without even thinking of where it comes from. And we're kind of optimized to consuming things. So in my head, I'm thinking, you know, it's going to be difficult for people as a whole to stop using that much energy. But then I'm thinking that since we are so optimized to consuming more things and buying things, maybe that's what we need to stop.
Yeah. Exactly. You know, I mean, there's a lot of different economic models we can follow on this, but when I was a kid, you know, my father had a toolbox that he, you know, gets with his cars with, and any tool I reached into that toolbox to use, it was American-made tool that was made to last forever. And then somewhere in the late 60s, somebody said, you know, the problem with this is that we're slowing the economy down. The economy became the driver. So this idea of planned obsolescence started entering into the equation. So you don't just buy a wrench, you buy a wrench until it breaks, and you buy another wrench until it breaks, and you buy another, and the cheaper the wrench's prefabrication, the faster it breaks. So the more economic growth you have. Well, economic growth is a very bad metric. You know, we need to talk about quality of life as a metric of success, not economic growth, because the only thing that grows continuously in nature is cancer. And that's what we have. We have an economy that is predicated on continuous growth. I mean, they're freaking out. The people, the economists who are, you know, invest in this are freaking out because people are not reproducing fast enough. We got a problem. We got a lot of people on this planet. You know, we don't need more. And if more people means that this idea of economic growth is, you know, we're going to adhere to that. I mean, it's a bad equation. It's a feedback loop. It's not working. So that's when I say, you know, what's the best way to quiet down the ocean is to stop buying stuff.
Good answer.
But you know, it's everything else as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think we've also been trained to see that we need to buy things to be happy. You know, if I buy this car, then I'll become more happy. And so we need to realize that that's not true.
Yeah. Well, we've gotten away from, a lot of indigenous cultures had what was considered the gift economy. There's a book by Lewis Kide called The Gift, which talks about this in detail. The gift economy basically circulates things that people acquire or they fabricate themselves. So you might say that this turtle rattle was given to me by my grandfather, and it was made for him by his father. So now I'm going to give it to you because I think you could be really, you got to enjoy it and you make your life better with it. And so it improves the life of the person that I give it to, but it also improves my life because I now have a bonded relationship with somebody I give it to, and they appreciate that and me. And, it ends up, it's not an economy that can be controlled by bankers. It's an economy that really essentially is putting value ahead of wealth. And the value is the exchange value of our relationship. That's more important than whether or not I have a cool car.
Yeah. I'll start doing that.
Yeah. It's easy.
Yeah.
It's cheaper too. It's less expensive.
Yeah. I think mindset and perspective is a huge thing of this. I think that's really important for someone to understand.
Yeah.
Well, now I'd like to get your views on ocean pollution. And as we all know, one of the major sources of ocean pollution is plastic. So what do you think is the best way to address that?
Stop using plastic.
Yeah.
Stop at the wellhead. Here's the problem. This is really the fossil fuel. This last century has been the fossil fuel century. And when you pull oil out, or just hydrocarbons, we'll just call them hydrocarbons, out of the ground, you pull out of the stuff, you refine it. It goes to a refinery. And a lot of it's refined into something you can burn, oil or gas, diesel fuel. But you have all these byproducts that you refine out of that. And what is this stuff? I mean, I live in a perfect place for this. It's not a metaphor. I mean, the Richmond refinery is across the bay from me. And they have pulled all this stuff out of it. It's incredibly toxic stuff. So what do we do with this toxic stuff? Oh, let's make bug poison out of it. So Ortho is a bug poison factory that is owned by Chevron, and they make bug poison out of this toxic stuff they pull out of the earth. And then, what they just like, they're putting this big ethane cracking, they call it cracking, but it's a refinery essentially, plant in Pennsylvania. Why? Because they're doing all this fracking, and they're getting a lot more ethane out of the ground than they're hoping to get. So they're going to make it's the largest ethane cracking plant in the known universe. And what do they use ethane for? Polyethylene, PET, all these ethylene compounds, which are plastic. Mm-hmm. And so that's where plastic comes from, oil. So we got to stop, if we stop using oil, we decrease I'm going to go out on a limb here, but one of the things that I heard at the start of this war in Ukraine was that they were going to try to shut off the Nord Stream pipeline from Russia that goes through Ukraine to Europe. Mm-hmm. Okay, now the fossil fuel guys are involved in this thing. And our Biden was just there last week, and he just a few days ago, and he said, we're going to allow for American liquid natural gas producers to sell to Europe. Okay, so they're crushing the Russian fossil fuel industry and handing their keys over to American fossil fuel guys. Well, back in 2005, Dick Cheney, who was an oil guy at Halliburton, became our vice president, and he ended up he became a vice president in 2001. But in 2005, they had this what they called a domestic energy security act, which is our energy bill, and it was heavily weighted in fossil fuel. And a lot of the environmentalists were pretty upset because they had these private meetings where they crafted this bill and didn't let anybody in, even though it's our tax dollars and we're paying these guys their salaries. They didn't let us in on those meetings.
Mhm.
And so they threw us a bone. They said, okay, because energy security, these guys want to expand their industry. They said, we're not going to sell any natural gas off the coast, outside of the continental United States. Well, that was before fracking really boom happened. And they're realizing they're getting a lot more of this natural gas out of it than they were anticipating. Now they have a surfeit of this stuff, but because they said they weren't going to sell this unless it was a national security problem, they're stuck with it. And what should come walking down the line here? Well, this little opportunity to shut off the Russian natural gas supply. And now it's a national security issue, and the US fossil fuel companies can sell it to Europe.
So everything is just very interconnected with each other.
Yeah, so we basically have to stop fossil fuel at the wellhead.
Mhm.
And that includes plastic, because the plastic efforts that are going out there, I mean, people on the beach picking up plastic bits. There are trillions of pounds that are going out, annually of this stuff, or gargantuan amounts of it. And we all have it in our blood now. I mean, if you're eating seafood that's caught anywhere, you have this microplastic in our blood, and it's going to start clogging up our kidneys and our livers.
Mhm.
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And these guys will argue that it's not a problem, that our economy is more important, that if we stop this, our economy is going to crash. No, we're gonna basically, kill us all if we don't stop.
Mhm. You
It's
said
not an
that,
economic issue.
yeah. You said that plastic is everywhere, and I agree with that. We're so used to consuming plastic in our everyday life, and I see it everywhere. Like from erasers to like food packaging, um, because it's just so convenient to use. So do you think that it's realistic for us to stop using plastic?
We're going to use it, but how do we use it is another question. So I have this iPhone, right? And because it's not 5G compatible, within the next year, I'm going to have to get rid of it.
Mhm.
What's going to happen? It's got a lot of plastic in it. The idea of, my mom was born in China, and she was pretty privileged there, and they lived on top of a hill in Canton. And they never had to rake their lawns because all the poor peasants would come and take all the leaves off because they could use it for fire.
Mhm.
So when she came over here, that was her idea of consumption, that you always use everything you can. When they started using plastic bags in supermarkets, which is kind of in the mid 60s, she was beside herself. What do I do with this stuff? So she was collecting them to use, but you know how it is. You can't collect all the plastic bags. So, and when she passed on, she had bags of plastic bags and, big jar of rubber bands. And you just have to stop doing that. You have to say, we're going to, so they did this in Germany. It was an interesting thing. They basically made the manufacturers responsible for all the materials that they use to manufacture stuff. So instead of having plastic packaging on your pencils or whatever you're buying, they had paper packaging. It was easier to dispose of. And Mercedes-Benz, which had some, 400 different formulas of plastic in their cars, reduced it down to like 37, because they needed to have a way to responsibly recycle that or work it so that they could use it. And when they had 437 different varieties, it wasn't going to happen. So they did that in Germany because they understand in Europe the idea of the public commons and the common good. Over here, that stuff is impossible to do because everybody is so invested in the experience of the individual.
Mhm.
So we have to talk about it differently. If we made manufacturers responsible for their packaging, they would change. We wouldn't
So,
use so much plastic.
mhm. So well, more specifically in the US, it looks like the best way out is less consumption. Less consumption of energy means less oil drilling, and that means less plastic.
Yeah, and less consumption of everything else. I mean, I lead a pretty low consumption life. I try my best to not. I do when I go to the market. I don't use plastic bags. I stick my vegetables in. For example, it's so easy to do because people are just used to throwing it in. But I'm trying to be as conscientious as possible. I'm just one little guy. But if everybody did that, and if we had some regulations saying that manufacturers responsible for their packaging, for example, that would change real fast.
Mhm. And so, in your opinion, is that a way that an individual can actually create change? Because Michael, when I talk to other people, especially my friends and the youth, on the topic of ocean conservation, they usually say that the problem of the ocean crisis is way too big for an individual person like me to create change. So what you just said, would that create change? Is that something that we should all be doing?
One little person is not going to change anything, but millions of one little people will. So we have to basically be conscientious about that and talk about it in terms of the common good, the public good, in the public commons. And yeah, I mean, it's being foisted on us. We don't have a lot of choices. So if people start, and there are some limp-wristed attempts to try to create public transit opportunities, but it takes 20% of the energy to move somebody across the country in a high-speed rail than it does in an airplane. And knowing that, Spain has got something like 3,500 kilometers of high-speed rail. China's got 10,000 kilometers of high-speed rail. And we have maybe 250 kilometers of high-speed rail right-of-way, which is not running right now, between Modesto and Bakersfield, because when they started putting that in, they wanted to have a high-speed rail from Los Angeles to San Francisco. Great demonstration project. And unfortunately, when they started working on it, the oil companies, much rather seeing bumper-to-bumper traffic on Interstate 5, threw $1 billion to defeat it. And they were effective. Now we have, high-speed right-of-way from nowhere to nowhere, and it's a crime. It's a crime against the planet. I want to put solar panels on my roof because now I've got an electric car, and if I get power from the sun, it'd be great. They want to charge me, $60 a month hookup charge to hook up to the utility. And when there's no sun, I need to use fuel from somewhere. But that will completely kill it, because my personal electric bill is about $68 a month. So why would I, drop $20,000 into solar if it's not going to pay for itself? And it's a wrong idea. They put the kibosh on that for the moment, but PG&E doesn't want to do that. They would rather run the energy and sell it and pay me nothing for it. And it's just capitalist thinking. We're in late phase capitalism right now.
Yeah, it's the whole thing is just backwards.
Yeah. But we can change it. I mean, if you and your pals, got vocal about this. I've got a niece who's probably about your age, and she's working with the Sunrise Movement, and she's one of those people who's up on the table with a megaphone, and she's basically making a nuisance of herself in these situations and she's got a lot of people who are following it, because we got to do something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that my biggest takeaway here is that the one thing that we can do is consume less. And then
Excellent.
Also that individual actions can be turned into systemic change.
Yeah.
All right. Great to know that we're on the same page.
Yeah. And it's people of your generation, my niece's generation, who are going to be the people who are saying, enough, stop. We refuse to live in a constant state of anxiety just because of this thing called the economy.
So I loved your insights today. I learned so much from our conversation, and I actually did walk away with actionable things that I can do, and all of us, for ocean conservation. And then I want to give a shout out to you, because thank you for the amazing work that you do. You're connecting with all sorts of different people, and those people are connecting with other people, and it's a ripple change. It's a ripple effect that I think is systemic change in one way. So thank you.
Thanks, Arshai. I mean, thanks for this opportunity to speak, and I hope that your podcast becomes really widespread and successful, and your navigating this thing really well. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words.